All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our Bear Q&A session. I'm Paul Gladen, Director of Accelerate Montana at the University of Montana. And we have a great panel here this afternoon, Mike Braun, Christine Liddig, Jen Stevens. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves and then we're gonna get into, Mike's gonna take us through a little bit of material and we're gonna start a conversation around that. And really our focus today is really how do small businesses in particular and in this time of COVID, really make sure they understand what can drive the financial viability and sustainability of their business, both right now, but also into the future as they may have to potentially evolve and adapt their business to respond to this environment. So that's our goal and objective. So let me work my way around who's at least on my screen. So Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Stevens, and I'm the Regional Director at the Missoula Small Business Development Center. That's a national program, and in Montana it has 10 offices, and we, do a lot to help with all things small business, but particularly like financial projections and business planning pieces.
Oh, you're muted.
Christine.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Christine Liddig. I'm a two-time business owner in Missoula, creator and owner-operator of Redbird Restaurant, and former owner-operator of Bernice's Bakery in Missoula.
And Mike.
Yeah, Mike Braun. I've been at the business school where I teach entrepreneurship, business model innovation, and strategy. I've been there for 15 years. Prior to that, I was in industry for 10 years where I worked in sales, business development, and also venture financing and investment banking. And I've been with startups and established companies, and I even have my own company. So hopefully what we talk about today will be able to provide some folks a little bit of direction and an opportunity to focus on what can help them through these troubled times.
Great. Mike, do you want to lead us off here?
Yeah, that would be great. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a screen share of some slides, and these are really just to provide some anchor points for the discussion. You got some great members here from the Bear Task Force. We've all been working together for a couple of months now, so I think we actually know how to read each other's minds in terms of our skills and capabilities. Hold on, here we go. So what we're going to do today is just use a very simple example to emphasize the importance of business model thinking and business model financials. We used a cafe or a coffee shop just because I think everybody can relate to it. But there's a little bit of background here that I'll come in with in a second. What we want to do is, again, sort of highlight the importance of business model thinking. And it's a term that's been around for 25, 30 years, but it's really over the last decade that it became much more sort of formalized and structured with some really good practitioner tools out there. And what's important is if you understand that business model, then you can quickly sort of come up with the financial structure around the business model and understand what's going to move the needle. And we have a financial model here that I'll walk you through for a coffee shop, which is really contribution margin model. And it's something that doesn't actually get enough attention. I mean, even HBR, Harvard Business Review, just did an article saying, this is what you want to focus on in terms of a very important financial statement for sort of the day-to-day operation of your business to understand where the costs are and, in essence, whether you can cover your nut, which is sort of at the top of everybody's question. And then we'll also talk a little bit about pivots. So pivots are business model redirects when all of a sudden your existing business model seems to have stalled, right? How do you begin to think creatively with imagination about ways to either grow the top line or save on the bottom line, or of course both, okay?
Mike, maybe just to interject your comment there about sort of the financials and contribution, maybe just to sort of contextualize what we're talking about today. We're really talking about financial management information, the day-to-day management of your business. So often, particularly for entrepreneurs that maybe are not that comfortable with financials. They sort of view it as, geez, well, I know I have to put that together for my tax return, or to show it to the bank, or they may have worked with people like Jen to kind of apply for a bank loan. And then to some extent, they hope they can just sort of maybe stop worrying about the financials. And this is really about using financial information day in, day out. We can certainly talk, and Jen and others, we've got experience helping people think about how you present financial information for sort of external stakeholders. But our focus today is on sort of that internal perspective.
No, I think that's a great point, Paul. And I'm the perfect candidate. I mean, even though I worked in investment banking where, I was sort of inundated with financial models and I had to run them and so on and so forth, it wasn't until I really kind of, ripped some of this stuff down to the studs where it provided some great insights. And just by way of introduction, I was made aware of this type of thinking really when I walked across campus with a former CFO of Microsoft who shared a really interesting story with me that he and one of the founders of Microsoft, when they were traveling the world, basically selling Microsoft products, to corporations, they would play this game, especially in coffee shops and pastry shops. And they would say to each other as they were sitting there, how much do you think this thing clears a day, a week, right? And what it did is it made them sort of look at the business in a very different fashion. And that's why I have this picture right here, in that, when I ask, what do you see? A lot of people will see, well, looks nice, and I see some products on the shelves, and I see a barista, and, so on and so forth. And that's all great. And I think so many, especially entrepreneurs who are working in the business, end up seeing their business sort of in terms of the day-to-day experience and the customer interactions. But what I'm hoping today is highlighted is that you also have to work on the business and actually see the business like this. This is the Matrix. So if you haven't seen the movie, do yourself a favor, but this is what you should see. You should see the business in terms of the numbers, the revenues and the revenue streams, and the cost of goods sold, and the cost structures, and all this other stuff. Because if you can't measure it, you can't really manage it, right? So I really urge people to get into this type of thinking. And again, as somebody who didn't do this, and then over the last really 6 to 8 years, started thinking this way, now when I go into whether it's a store or I go into a coffee shop or a restaurant or anything, this is the way that I really try and force myself to see businesses. And all of a sudden, you can actually pretty quickly get to a point where you say, well, actually, you know what, here are some of the growth challenges, for instance, or wow, this is a unique business model that can scale very effectively if they do this, right? So all of a sudden, it becomes a really cool sort of if-then exercise.
Mike, what I see as well when I see these numbers, I mean, I'm a numbers guy, but
right.
When I talk to entrepreneurs, finance is just a language that describes what's happening in the business. So these numbers are representative of cups of coffee, pastries, an hour of an employee's work, a square foot of office space, a bag of coffee beans. So understanding that those financial numbers that you need to get to grips with are driven, and I know this is what you're going to get to, but driven by real things, sort of
right.
inside business that you can actually touch and feel or observe.
Yeah, no, to your point, and I actually have this, I have sort of the right questions for the coffee shop, and this is really for the benefit of the viewers. This is something called the Business Model Canvas. It was introduced in 2010 by 2 Swiss guys in a book called Business Model Generation. It's all over YouTube. I mean, first of all, the other thing is the first 80 pages are actually free of charge. And at first it seems sort of simplistic, but it's really not. The more time you spend on seeing your business through these 9 building blocks, the better that you understand the sort of the interoperability between these different parts of your business. It's a way to bring visibility to your business, and then to understand, more importantly, how that revenue comes in and then trickles through these different building blocks and hopefully ends up in an ongoing stream of profitability. What's neat about it, folks, is that on the right-hand side, you're looking at revenue generating activities or tasks of the business. So for instance, your customer segments, Who are they? How many are they? How do you know, where are they? So you're looking at demographics, geographics, psychographics. You also see how you actually interact with them through customer relations and how you reach them through channels, whether it's promotion or delivery, and then the revenue streams. These are different streams that afford you to obviously figure out what your top line is going to be today and in the future. And then on the left-hand side, you have the cost or expenses. What are the most important activities, resources, and partnerships that help you bring your value proposition or your promise to the customer to market, right? And then here you also have the cost structure. Well, how do you actually structure the costs? You have a lot of fixed costs, you have a lot of variable costs, you have seasonal costs, cyclical costs, all these types of things. But the firmer your grasp on your business model, the better you'll understand that green thing at the bottom, which is, what does my profit look like, right? How do I cover my nut? Paul, do you want to come in on, you're a big fan of this and you use it all the time, so.
Yeah, I love the business model, and we use it with starting entrepreneurs just with an idea. I've used it in classes that I've taught in the College of Business for actually team that analyze Microsoft with it. I mean, you can use it for any kind of business. I think what's also incredibly valuable about it is not just to model what's happening in your business or what you think is going to happen with a startup business, but you can use it to think about, and this will lead to your kind of last section, at least on your agenda, Mike, pivots. Mm-hmm. You can use it to play with what can change. If you're going to move that profit number, maybe it started out red, or it's looking red right now, it's a loss, it's not a profit. The only way you're going to change that is by changing something above. You've got to change maybe your customer segments, or change your value propositions, or use some different channels to reach those customers. Or you've got to figure out how do you make some of those activities kind of more efficient, or what resources could you bring in? And resources are both physical things and intangible things. So those resources might be now moving to an e-commerce platform. What is it you can bring into the business that's now going to give you the capability to unlock new revenue streams? What new strategic partnerships could you form that might, again, enable you to enhance your value proposition? Maybe you're, and in non-COVID times, even if you're just, for example, in the food space, what are you doing? Maybe kind of build relationships with sort of organic kind of food suppliers that is going to better resonate with a customer segment and is much more thoughtful about what they're putting into their bodies these days. So yeah, I love this tool. I think it answers so many questions for you in business, and should trigger lots of ideas and about possibilities.
Yeah. You know, and we didn't necessarily spend too much time on the value proposition, but the fact that it's in the middle indicates that it's probably the most important thing. It's how you actually connect with your customers, and it makes your customers open their wallet to you, and it'll also make them walk past competitors to you, right? So that's why we're saving this for the end, when we also talk about some pivots in the value prop.
Yeah, the way I always articulate it, Mike, is the value proposition creates value for the customer. They're like, kind of, wow, this is awesome. However, they determine value, whether that's financial, emotional, other things, kind of convenience. But you create value for the customer, then the rest of the business model can hopefully create value for you as a business owner.
Right. Yep. So this, and again, I would urge, if you're not familiar with it, just get yourself up to speed. It doesn't take long. It maybe takes a little bit of time once you start drilling down and unpacking your own business with it, but it's definitely worth the effort here. So, you know, when we're talking about business models and business model financials, especially for, you know, what we're doing today and in this particular context, what we want to do is sort of understand how much net profit do we generate, whether it's in a year, a month, a week, or on a daily basis. To answer that question, can I cover my nut? And a lot of times, can I also scale? Because businesses sometimes will create business models that make it really challenging to scale, to grow. So you want to have a little bit of that foresight as well to understand, wait a minute, what might be the Achilles heel in my business model that prevents it from growing, because all of a sudden my costs are going to spiral out of control. And then at the end of the day, and you know, I work with so many entrepreneurs and business owners, it's always the question, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? it's great, and I really do respect entrepreneurs for working hard, but at some point that should also become working smart. So the longer you're in it, maybe the less sweat you're spending on it, right? So in a way, the business starts working for you. So the right questions, as Paul had, already mentioned before, whether it's Mike's Cafe Emporium or anything else, but it does start with what value do you bring, and it can be one of sort of efficiency, financial, it can be time savings, whatever it is, right? Obviously, will our customers buy from us, and why? Who is the customer? Can I actually think of the customer archetype? Where do we find these customers? How do we reach them? When do they buy? How often do they buy? How much will they spend with each one? And can I get them to spend more or more often, right? And then where does additional revenue come from? And I think this one sort of sometimes gets a little bit less attention than necessary. But if we think about, the biggest market cap company, well, who knows in today's, stock price, but Amazon. I mean, isn't it funny when you think about all the revenue streams of Amazon? I mean, they let merchants sell their stuff. They sell their own stuff, like the Kindle. You can get the Prime delivery. You can get their movies. You could, you can get, I mean, it just goes on forever. So all of these revenue streams come together in a river called the Amazon. Yeah, I know. All right. And then little humor there. And then obviously, then how do we think about that cost structure, right? So here's the right kind of information when you're, again, trying to see that coffee emporium through the matrix, right? It is, to Paul's point, hours of operation, average sales per hour, customer segments, marketing and sales, who, where, when, how much does it actually cost me to acquire and even retain a customer, right? Talked about those revenue streams, how many, how robust, are they seasonal? You think about a coffee shop, I mean, during the week, you're gonna have very different times that they're gonna, you're gonna see customers walking in for different reasons. Also, again, those important activities and the resources and partnerships that can actually either help you smooth out or boost the revenues, or help you with a much more efficient and effective cost structure. And then, and you'll see this here a little bit, is the variable and fixed cost structure, which is where we get into the contribution margin. I think another thing here is really trying to understand, what your cost of goods are, whether it's cost of service or cost of goods sold, right? And understanding, what makes up the biggest costs of the products that I'm selling out there, or the services, and are there better ways that I can actually think through what's important, what's not important with that cost of goods sold? Can I actually partner with somebody? Can I source something that makes it more, more attractive? When we're thinking about the contribution margin statement, here's where it's a little bit different versus an income statement, in that what you're going to do is you're going to tease out as much as you can your variable costs of the business, which are the costs that vary with the quantity or the volume of the products produced, right? So the more that you make, the more it'll cost. The less that you make, the less it'll cost, right? When you take the revenue and you subtract your variable costs, then you understand how much revenue you have left over to cover your fixed costs. So these are the costs that don't vary dependent on quantity or volume. So this will be like rent and utilities and so on and so forth. Surely you're going to have some that are sort of quasi, they fall in between, but the more that you can tease these apart, the more you're going to understand how you move your needle. And what's interesting is that variable costs are usually better when you have certain uncertainties in the market. When there's uncertainty in the market, and you kind of have to vary your production of products. Because think about the airlines, for instance. They have huge fixed cost infrastructure. They got all these planes, right? And all of a sudden, travel comes to a standstill, what are they going to do with these planes? Convert them into hotels? Or they can't do anything with those, right? So the businesses that can sort of convert their fixed costs into variable costs very quickly will have much more flexibility when the demand is uncertain, when there's sort of market fogginess, right? Anybody else want to? I'm going to pause here for a sec if anybody wants to jump in.
I'll just say, as someone who's been in the food service industry, and hearing your example with airplane industry and airline industry, just feeling incredibly lucky at how we were able to shift and change and adjust during all sorts of times over the last 20 years, whether it was the recession or cost of goods increase. It's just a prime reflective opportunity to say, whoa, having so many variable costs did really give us the opportunity to shift and change.
Awesome.
Christine, I'm sort of curious, as Mike's sort of running through this, and particularly in many ways this contribution margin statement, you may not have called it this, but did you have something in your head, whether it was in the restaurant or kind of Benice's, where you're like kind of, yeah, I know sort of how much I need to cover each week or each day, and how that translates into like how many covers or how many cups of coffee or pastries?
Absolutely. And I think for Bernice's specifically, it was very complicated. It was a complicated business model in a lot of ways, not a model that if it were to open now would be a successful business model. It just accommodates too many segments in how it operates. But having been in Missoula for 40 years, its fluidity and the number of people who understand that it exists and what it has to offer helps it stay alive. But we started out very much looking at day-to-day costs, but as we continued to know the business better, our check-ins were broader, which I think that's something to consider when we're trying to think about financial literacy and supporting small businesses who feel intimidated by learning about their numbers and what they mean, is that commitment, it can be difficult, strenuous, you got to dig into it. But over the years, as you're pulling back and you're starting to allow your business to run without you, it's a model that allows you to do periodic check-ins. It's a monthly check-in, or maybe it becomes a quarterly check-in. So towards the end of ownership of Bernice's, we were really looking at our margins and how we were doing on a monthly basis, unless we were physically feeling an energy shift in how we were operating. And that could be dictated by our employees or by our customers.
And I want to ask one more question here, Christine. And to me, it's the trade-offs between sort of, relying on prepackaged software. I mean, there's so much free, and then obviously the paid stuff, versus just taking the time and building a stripped down model from scratch. And I understand that maybe people don't have a lot of familiarity or experience with Excel. But in my view, it's sometimes you can sort of almost get, you get engineered into somebody else's software program, and all of a sudden you're like, this field doesn't really apply to me, or I don't understand how this thing connects over here. Do you have any experience or insights on that? And Jennifer too.
Yeah, specifically, again, I'll hold tight to Bernice's in that way. Because we had so many intricacies, for the longest time, it was even hard for us to discover a point of sale system that would work for our business when they were first coming into play. And believe you me, when we were counting each and every single order and hash marking by paper when point of sale systems were coming into play, we were diving and digging into, please, someone develop something that hits all our nuances. And so when we were doing our numbers, we definitely focused on putting together our own image and being able to translate what that looked like for our business, so that we could break it down by department, we could break it down by item if we felt like, or we could be much more broad scoped. I don't think that I've seen to date a system out there that would have accommodated Bernice's in understanding how we were operating and what we were looking at for net income at the end if we hadn't been paying attention to the details of our own business. That said, all of those programs and opportunities and examples out there are great things to lean into when you're trying to figure out what it is you do want to track for your own business. They help you not forget something. They help you look at different ways in which you can evaluate. So when you first showed your diagram, I'd never seen it before. I'm just going to say that. I was like, whoa, this is all new terminology for things that I've been running at Bernice's for years, but in a different model. And I was staring at it and I was thinking, wow, it would just be fun retroactively to just kind of plug Bernice's in there and see what it looks like. And in some ways, to me, I was interested in it because it sort of looked like a game. It looked like Clue or something. And by the end, I was going to know who killed what and where. So I was constantly looking for any of those things I could lean into to know my business better, but also to spark my own personal interest. So like I said, that slide you just showed sparked my interest right back up again.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, I would say like with this contribution margin statement, the revenue minus variable costs, and like thinking about business management, I think a lot of businesses try to get a software that's compatible with tracking the data that's important for taxes, which can be completely different data than what you need to track for business management. And so like as a business owner thinking about almost sort of reverse engineering the things on this slide, especially for startups, like identifying your fixed costs first, and then thinking about how much revenue do you need to cover those costs, you know, also taking into account like cost of goods sold. And the software that you need to kind of do that sometimes can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. It might need to be more robust, but if a new business does take the time just to track those things in a very basic way, even for a short amount of time, that can really help them know what kind of functionality they need in a software program.
I also think to follow up on that, Jen, and everyone at this roundtable as we've been meeting, one of the pieces that we've talked about over and over again is also finding the right individuals to help you do that job. So having a bookkeeper that understands financials and is willing to tweak with you or without you, alongside you. And I have to say that when you were referencing people using their financials for tax purposes, it was one piece that I really delegated off. I found an accountant that I trusted. My bookkeeper was side by side with me. And when we got to that place, I quit focusing so much on what taxes looked like and allowed the individuals that I had hired to do that work for me. And that is also something that we should be reminding people as we're talking about financial literacy. You don't absolutely have to do and or be the rock star at every single piece of your business.
Mm-hmm.
I would fully encourage that. We've Jen and I have both seen businesses that got themselves in trouble because they tried to figure out how to do all the bookkeeping themselves, intermingling personal and kind of business funds. It can get messy. Also, just want to highlight essentially an implicit statement you made there, Christine, which is the accountant that can do your tax return may or may not be the right person to do your day-to-day bookkeeping. They're both accountants, but they have different skill sets. Not always those skills are in the same person. They can be, but not always.
Cool. We're going to get to those financials here in a second, just so people understand sort of the cost of goods sold, right? Here, for instance, is the breakdown of a cup of coffee at $4.80, right? And actually what you're going to see here is you're going to see both variable and fixed costs. But what you see is the raw materials and labor are going to be the ones that are the variable costs, and then the other ones are pretty much fixed, okay? And I think what's important here is that, you know, I see this, that that when folks are looking at their sort of financials, they're thinking about a cost plus. So they figure out, okay, here's my cost, and then I'm going to put sort of a, markup on that. But I think what this kind of thinking encourages is more pricing based on value. So value-based pricing is what the customer is willing to pay for. It's the willingness to pay. And obviously, the more value created, the higher the price that you can charge. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs where they ended up leaving a lot of money on the table because they were underpricing. I said, when's the last time you increased prices? 5 years ago. I said, you know what? Before you do anything else, increase the price a little bit. And it was like a shrug, right? I mean, everybody was like, yeah, sure. Okay, I'll pay for that. And then obviously you also want to think about pricing around the business model, right? So it actually makes good sense.
I really like that you pointed out the value created piece. I think new business owners can especially get caught up in trying to nail down the specific labor cost per cup of coffee, for example, which is very difficult to figure out, especially at the beginning. There are databases and things like that that can provide some industry standards for those kinds of benchmarking. But shifting the thinking to like, what value is this product creating, and then basing your pricing on that can be a much easier task for the beginning entrepreneur also.
Awesome.
That is such an important kind of message. I worked with too many entrepreneurs that go with that cost plus approach. And one, that their plus margin is always too low.
Yeah.
Almost whenever I sat down with someone, that's how they did it. The margin was always too low. There were other sort of fixed costs or sort of capital costs from time to time. Geez, I need to invest in a new piece of equipment or whatever that just weren't factored in. So in the long run, they end up losing money. But to your point, it's all about value. Cost is irrelevant to the price, other than in your business model, to make sure in the long run, your cumulative costs are going to be less than your cumulative revenues.
I'd love to piggyback in with a short story connected to this, and I know we want to jump to the numbers, but when we originally bought Bernice's, I think we had owned it for 2 years when the commodities market and the price of flour went up 300%. And when that happened, the cost plus model just didn't fly. And it was a moment and a big shift for us, and we made many, many different decisions. But just to piggyback on what you were talking about, Mike, we really looked at all the products that we were selling in that cost plus model and realized we had one particular product that we knew was of value in Missoula because no one else was doing it. And that was our high quality cakes. And we immediately shot up the price of those cakes in order to compensate and balance out the cost plus model that we had with everything else in the bakery. So when I talk about changing and shifting and adapting, in the end, even when I left, we still had items that were in cost plus and other items that we looked at and priced based on value. So you also can, again, go to shape shifting your business as to what works for you and what items you're looking at and where the value is. And it also begins to then start to point, well, these three on the bottom that we thought people valued and wanted, they're actually starting to trickle away. It's time to get rid of those.
Oh, great point. Yeah. Especially, when it comes to product audits, I think that's a very good way to look at it, especially as the business sort of gets a reputation and some of the products, to your point, sort of rise to the top, right? All of a sudden you got these winners that really stand out where the value has really become sort of part of the brand and the operation. And all of a sudden it's like, this is the pony we're going to ride, right? Here is this contribution margin statement for Mike's Cafe Emporium. I don't want you to get intimidated. This is actually pretty short. What you have here is you have just an Excel sheet that has the revenue up top, and then the variable costs, and then the fixed costs broken out. And what we did here, folks, is we just looked at it on a daily basis. Of course, you can do this on a weekly basis, and you should, and then in that case, you just kind of times 5 or 7 or whatever it is. But what we wanted to do is to understand how many customers have to come in through the door, or obviously here we also have a wholesale piece, but how many customers do we need to cover our nut, right? And what you'll see is that the green boxes are inputs, and then the yellow ones are calculations. And here it was very simple. I mean, it was like, let's really strip this down to the basics. We got a business that does about $1 million in annual revenue. It's open, 334 days a year with daily revenue of about 3,000, right? And of course, that sort of straight lined, you're going to have a lot of variability weekly, monthly, over the entire year, but we just straight line it to understand that. And once you have sort of the basics, then you can start to complicate it. Get the basic cake, if you will, and then you can decorate it, right? But again, try to really build it sort of as simply as possible. In this case, we have a business that does 1/3 of the revenue in wholesale and 2/3 in retail. And of course, here again, you can break this down into how many cups of coffee at priced and so on and so forth, right? But in this case, what we did is we said, all righty, there are 250 retail customers who on average do $8, right? And some of them are going to get more because they're going to get some bread and they're going to get lunch and maybe some rolls, and then some folks are going to get less. But here's sort of the average. And then we also had the wholesale number, which is 10 customers wholesale getting an order of $100. Restaurants who want multiple desserts and cakes, or maybe it's somebody else, whatever it is, right? Then what we did is we looked at the variable costs for each category. So we have our retail cost of goods sold and our wholesale. And in this case, this was really looking at percentages, historical percentages. Now, there's a little bit of a beware here. So your percentages might be too high. Don't take those as a given. I mean, really what you want to say is, well, does it have to be 22%, or can I actually bring it down if I look at maybe getting a new supplier in, or changing the formulation, or maybe some of the packaging I don't necessarily need, right? Or obviously your labor costs. But what we did here is we said, well, if these are the percentages, then these are the costs of goods for the retail and the wholesale. And what we see is that, the revenue minus the variable cost for both was about 50%. So now 50% of your remaining revenue is there to cover your fixed costs. And when we look at the fixed costs, here we just took the historicals and said, okay, we got payroll expenses, taxes, benefit, all this other stuff that we have sort of in terms of historicals that then show you the percentage on the right-hand side, right? Of course, you can then say, okay, let's say, well, I'll come to that in a second. Let me just go through this. So then we have our total fixed costs, which gives us a fixed cost as percentage of revenue, which is about 40%, which when we look at this business on that 3,000 daily revenue, it's giving us about $291 of net income, which is a margin of about 9.7, right? So obviously we're in an environment right now where a lot of businesses have seen huge hits to their top line, right? So let's say that all of a sudden our retail customers go down to 150. I'm just going to change that. We're going to keep the retail price. Maybe they're doing the same thing, but let's see what happens. Well, when we see that, we're actually losing $109 a day. So we're at a -5% net income, or a loss, right? So what it does is it provides us a little bit of visibility in terms of, wait a minute, which ones are the most important sort of measures out there? Well, maybe I can bring up my wholesale a little bit more. I mean, obviously restaurants aren't there, but maybe there's, sort of delivery services or whatever it is. And we're going to add, 20 of those. And all of a sudden, phew, actually, you know what? If you just double your wholesale, it makes a huge jump. You're actually more profitable than you were before, right? But you have to understand what's going to move the needle. Maybe our operating supplies are going to go up now because now we have to have PPE in place everywhere, and it's going to jump from 1.4% to, oops, what was it before? I just messed that up. Oh, so it's going to go to 150. Let's just put it that way. Okay, well, that's going to be a hit of about 4%, right? But again, you have to understand what's going to move the needle, because I think what happens is that a lot of entrepreneurs think that I'm going to cut this, I'm going to increase that, and it don't move the needle. The juice ain't worth the squeeze, right? So really figure out what's the most important thing here.
Like
so
just
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Next on that, I mean, one of the other variables here is revenue, right? It's price. I mean, I've heard examples of people saying actually, because customers, particularly sort of food service businesses, know how much they're struggling, that they've been kind of tipping more. So maybe that's showing they've got the willingness to pay a little more. So maybe put your price up, and what does that do?
Well, let's go back to the original. So just that one price increase going from 8 to 10, which, you know, that's not crazy, right? So again, look at this. We were at 8 before, and we were doing 9.7 in terms of net income percentage, right? And now we're just boosting pricing, to Paul's point, because we have that wiggle room. And yowzers, we got a 15%. That's pretty darn good. And this is only working with the existing business model, right? This is what we were doing before, playing with that. This is not starting to think about business model pivots, which is what we'll get to here in a second.
Like
go
ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, just as an interesting raw number note, when you made that change of $2 increase, it increased the revenue by like over $160,000.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yep, I see that right here. So that's the calculation up here. And again, I mean, you know, I would urge everybody with their business really figure out what are the indicators that help you understand what's going to move the needle, right?
Mike,
so that's what,
a couple of comments I would want to make. I mean, partly to that point, and the purpose of this model is not to try to tell you what the answer should be, but for you to play around with these different things to understand what really matters, right? Like the PPE thing, $100, it's not really going to make or break you. Dropping your customers from 250 to 150, wow, that's a problem. So it helps you focus on what are the things that matter, and therefore, from a management perspective, what do I need to be maybe investing some time and thinking in to try to address that, right? What do I do to maybe try to reduce the erosion from 250 to 150 customers to down to 100 or down to 200, or what do I need to do to maybe get the customers that are coming in buy a little extra, right? Hey, like take a loaf of bread back with you, take a cupcake for your partner, whatever it needs to be, right? How do you encourage them to spend a little more?
Yep.
And it was interesting to see, though, even though the retail customers dropped off like nearly 50%, a tiny additional uptick with the wholesale customers made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And when businesses are able to see like, oh, there's a path forward here, like I think that provides so much sort of like relief rather than not knowing, right?
Well, and it also provides you with a little bit of, well, here's what I can control versus what I can't, right? So I think that, you know, hope is never a strategy. So what are some of the things that I can actually try to engineer here in my existing cost structure, for instance? And of course, yeah, if I can come up with some creative ways to promote, maybe I'll get sort of that extra $2 of spending, or I'll find an entirely new sort of B2B / wholesale customer segment that I can go after, right?
So just one other interjection as well. The other thing we use this model for is playing around with the numbers to sort of see what maybe gets you to a financial outcome that you'd be comfortable with, but then sanity checking, is that realistic, right? And we've done this sort of non-COVID environment. It's like, okay, so if I run the numbers I need to have 1,000 customers a day. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
right.
right.
Let's run the analysis on that. So how many hours a day are you open for? Well, I'm open from kind of 6 a.m. till 4 in the afternoon, 10 hours. Okay, there's 100 customers an hour. So that's, you got to serve a customer every like 40 seconds. Like, you see that? Can you get people? You get them a full triple whatever latte in 40 seconds? Yeah, maybe.
Right.
So just
Well,
doing sanity checking, or like even, oh, I need to adjust my labor. Maybe I need to reduce that down. Well, can you actually just cut labor that easily? Are employees going to be happy to suddenly do a bunch of reduced hours so that you can use it to figure out how would the numbers work for you, but also then figure out, but are those things actually achievable?
and I think that's a great segue, for business model pivots, right? Because you might be running the numbers and you're like, I gotta think of something else. I gotta think of another, sort of a business model pivot, as we had said. So hold on one second as I get this. So obviously those pivots are when you've looked at your business, your existing business, and you've said, you know what, I have to refigure what I'm going to offer or how I'm going to offer it to whom, right? So are there different customers that I haven't tapped yet? Where are those, or how do I reach them? Or, how do I even get to them? Maybe I'm delivering all of a sudden. When do I do it? How am I playing sort of my hours of operation? With whom am I partnering? And then really also this why, which then circles back to the value proposition. That one to me is interesting, because if you see that all of a sudden your business just isn't getting the traction with customers, then you kind of have to revisit your why, right? You have to say to yourself, wait a minute, especially in this kind of changing environment, it might be that my customers are migrating in terms of their consumer behavior. They want something else. They're saying, I can't afford this, or this just doesn't feel safe to do it this way, or whatever it is. So then get back to the why, right? And this is the other thing that I wanted to tell people, which is, you know what, find a YouTube video. This is all over YouTube, which is design thinking. And design thinking is a kind of approach that has 5 stages to really figuring out a customer-centric approach to understanding their demand, right? So it requires a lot of empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of your customers, both current and future, empathizing with them. What are they going through? What are their feelings? What are their pains? What are the gains that they're looking for? Spend time here, because especially in markets or environments that are sort of tumultuous and all over the place, this is what is happening. There's so much going around. I mean, think about industries that have gotten decimated. People are saying, I'm not going to hotels, I'm not going to restaurants, I'm not going to bars, I'm not getting on planes, right? What is it that they're thinking about? I'm not doing this, but here's where I'm going. And the more that you can sort of listen to the market and put yourself into the shoes of your customers, the more that you'll find potential sort of, revenue stream opportunities, if you will, that then you can prototype or test out.
Mike, just to give a great example of this, and it may feel a little distant to kind of Missoula, but I shared a podcast, and I know Christine listened to it. A linear restaurant in New York, frequently rated as like the #1 restaurant in the world.
Chicago.
Sorry?
Chicago.
Okay, sorry.
I want to be clear.
Yeah. Several $100s a head to go to dinner to this place. Just an amazing culinary experience. COVID hits. They're like, we got to shut the restaurant. What are we going to do? The founder of that, he's like, we need to figure out how we can start doing kind of takeout and delivery. And his kind of team were all like, kind of, okay, how do we figure out how to do this fancy stuff? He's like, no, empathize. People want comfort food. They want $30, right? So they had to refigure out how to do that, and how to not just serve like 200 people a night, but serve 1,000 people. And the sort of the punchline on this podcast is, like, when this was recorded, I think 6 weeks ago, just before the podcast, he said, we had our highest revenue day in the restaurant's history ever.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's scary, but you do it, especially when necessity becomes the mother of invention kind of thing, and you test the stuff out. I mean, especially in the coffee business, which I come back to a lot. A lot of times, it ain't about the coffee, folks, right? I mean, look at Starbucks. They're paying a premium for that third place experience, right? But we have so many different business models built around coffee, where they answer a different why. So Purringtons, and we see these all over the place, also in the US, where you go in and it's filled with animals. In this case, it's cats, right? And you can play with the cats and they're up for adoption. Yes, you're getting a cup of coffee and then you're sort of getting cat therapy, right? Another one is Siva Cafe. I've actually worked with somebody in Missoula who did this, where it was like no pricing. You just give us what you think. And it was interesting in that some customers didn't pay anything. They're like, thanks, man, but those who did on average paid more, quite a bit more than what they would have paid at price. And for those categories, that business actually increased their revenue. Another one is Ogori in Japan, where you go in, you put in your order, and it's a surprise order. You get whatever the person before you ordered. Isn't that crazy? Obviously, there's another one. I mean, we see these, the laundry cafes. You're there for coffee. You're going to do your laundry, right? But the whole point, folks, is think about those business models and the whys. What is it that people want? And then build, especially in this type of environment, build also, or take into account the experience from start to end, right? That customers want with you, with your business, with your product, with your brand.
I think those are great examples, because even if, like, on the face of it, your business is a coffee shop, your product and value proposition may not be coffee. It might be community or therapy or playfulness, like with that restaurant, and so how do you package that in this new environment, right? Because that's what people are coming for, in some way.
Yeah, totally.
And so much of that is about listening to customers or observing as well. I'm sort of, essentially, Christine, your sort of comments earlier about sort of adapting over time. I was sort of wondering, maybe with sort of Benice's, how you observe trends, for example, sort of gluten-free or move away from kind of dairy, kind of milk to sort of soy and other. How did you sort of hear and observe those things? Were just more customers asking for it? Were you monitoring trends in the industry?
I think historically, over the years of having two local businesses specifically, one of my better skill sets is just that empathy piece, which was always why I never held myself to high standards of needing to understand or implement my own financials all the time, because it was the empathy piece and that connective energy that I could tap into, whether it was the customers or whether it was the community, or whether it was even staff. And I think now circling back to your question, Paul, we put in an incredible amount of trust in our staff. And we created a leadership program, 35 employees. A third of our employees were engaged in a leadership program where we met once a week. And sure, I could keep a pulse, but I was also realizing I was aging, people's desires were changing. If I wanted my business to shift into the new generation of activity and interest, that I needed to really, truly open my heart and mind to listening to younger voices and what they were hearing from the customers, but even more importantly, what they were experiencing on the floor. And so all of those elements in those conversations were how we continued to stay, to keep that empathetic touch that ended up prompting shifts all the time. So specifically when you're talking about gluten-free, we had so many tastings of gluten-free product for Bernice's, and there was a huge push. And we understood why, just based on our own value system of the manipulation of food products in the world. And we didn't want to lean that way, but we also know we couldn't buy organic flour because it just wouldn't fit our price point for our customers. But with gluten-free, we probably spent 6 months tasting, trying, bringing food down to this meeting once a week. And what we finally decided was, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make gluten-free product, but we're going to make gluten-free product that all of our customers want to eat. And we chose very specific products. So the peanut butter cookie at Bernice's was gluten-free, but everyone ate it. And sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes someone who was gluten-free would say, you guys just really don't have enough product. And I would say, you know what? I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm going to share openly and honestly that we don't want to produce anything that's less than. So we appreciate your patience. We're going to keep going after it. But after all our testing and all of what we've seen across the market and what other people are eating and tasting and experiencing and everything they're saying, we empathize with you. But our standard is everyone has to want to eat it, that they don't actually care if it's gluten-free. And in fact, for anyone listening, and you three, go have the gluten-free yellow cupcake at Bernice's. And that thing is the bomb, and you would never know the difference. You just wouldn't know.
I've purchased those cupcakes for my kids before from the good food store, and sometimes they don't have the regular ones in stock, and I just buy the other ones, and they don't even know. So.
Yeah. And that was, you know, a driving point of all of our decision making.
And that sounds like kind of is the juice worth the squeeze, Mike. From Christine's perspective, that's what her business was about. It's like, I'm not going to compromise in terms of what I want to do. We're actually at the top of the hour, so we probably need to wrap things up. Mike, Christine, Jen, anything you want to just say in closing?
I just want to thank Mike for all the work that he put forth. It was, even as someone who's been in the industry, it's just always fun to learn new perspectives, hear phrases and ways that you jest and or keep interest in what is financial literacy and can literally put you to sleep if someone isn't keeping you entertained. So
yeah. No, thank you. And yeah, just embrace it. You know, it might feel challenging, but I think if you do it, you know, the upfront work will pay huge dividends on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Like Paul said earlier, those little numbers on a spreadsheet, they actually represent real things in real life. And sometimes like imagining those things make working with the numbers a little bit more exciting and relevant. And when you can put some goals out there for your business and see it moving forward, that's an exciting piece.
Yeah. And then really just to wrap here, just to say, obviously we provided this, hopefully it's informational, helpful to folks, but the BEAR program is there to help people navigate through this. So don't feel you've got to take what we've told you today and now just go figure it all out for yourself. I think you'll learn a lot by trying a little, but absolutely feel free to reach out to us through the BEAR program, umt.edu/BEAR, submit a request, and one of our team will reach back out and happy to kind of spend some time and kind of walk you through it and maybe give you some feedback or some help with what you're putting together. So thanks to Mike, thanks to Jen, thanks to Christine.
Thanks everybody.
And we'll
Awesome.
again sometime soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks.